Greetings and salutations to you all, ladies and gents. As always, I hope you are fantastic. My name is Kluger, and today I bring to you another Grim Dawn build guide. This is like the third take of this intro, and I'm talking slower. It's working out so much better. Yes, Nidalla's Witch Hunter, as you can see from the title of this video. Now, if you've played any amount of Grim Dawn before, the name Nidalla will, of course, ring a bell. Nidalla being someone who does lots of poison and acid damage is all we really need to worry about. This build's primarily focused on the Nightblade Mastery, which through the dual-wielding tree and some other bits and pieces that we'll get into, of course, throughout the course of the video, has lots of options for poison and acid damage in the form of augmenting the dual-wielding tree itself. There's Shadow Strike. We'll talk about the particulars very, very soon, but there's lots of poison and acid damage on offer. We use the Occultist Mastery more in an augmenting kind of auxiliary way to support all the poison and acid damage that we do. And of course, there's a very nice heal / buff spell that comes from the Occultist Mastery, which is awesome and good and helps the build along quite a lot. Devotion, of course, also serves very, very nicely when it comes to boosting up poison and acid damage, as well as offering a variety of debuffs against enemies. They come from the Nightblade tree itself. There's a stun on offer, there's some debuffing going on there, and like I said, the devotion options also can debuff lots of things. And gear, there's skills and stuff from, yeah, there are some skills from gear and otherwise that do help with the debuffing as well. And kind of accidentally, this build through skill selection or rather gear selection, and then you get the skills from that, has a heap of triggered poison and acid damage, just like either by hitting criticals or being hit by enemies, all that sort of stuff, all bundles up and makes almost a glass cannon. It's glass cannon-ish because it's quite an offensively natured build, but it seems to hold up pretty well through ultimate, through sheer damage output, debuffing, and fun times. So without further ado, let's hop over to the next segment, which will be skill selection. Alrighty, ladies and gents, so without further ado, let's have a little chat about the skill selections for this build. We will, of course, start with Occultist, because it's the first one that happened to open. From the Occultist side of things, it's really quite a simple thing. Now, it is maxed out. It's almost, in a way, seems a little redundant to have maxed out the tree, but, I mean, you kind of want to get to possession for this build for the crazy buffs it gives you to your acid and poison damage. Nice resistances there, as you can see as well. The damage absorption is pretty dang, it's pretty dang handy for such a squishy build, so, well, a relatively squishy build, okay? Take it easy. So yeah, pretty nice to have, all in all, for sure. And the other thing that we grab from here is Blood of Dreeg, accompanied by Aspect of the Guardian, one of our 2 heal spells, and also quite an offensive spell. We'll probably talk about this closer to the end of the video, in the sort of playstyle, as it were, but this is kind of, you almost want to treat this like a passive. I mean, you can time its casting so that you can use it as a healing spell, and of course that's what you'll end up doing inevitably, but you can also, basically you want to try have it on constantly because of all the offensive deliciousness it offers as well. You've got flat acid damage on there, a bunch of offensive ability comes from there, and you've got percentage damage buffs from here as well. But then also it's got some sort of passive buffs as well. For example, poison and acid resistance, physical resistance on Aspect of the Guardian. So there's reasons to be having that pretty much going as often as you can, if not just permanently, which is what I often aim to do at the cost of energy. But I mean, this isn't too much of an energy intensive build, so shouldn't be too much of a problem. Now, I was smart. See, look at this. Mostly naked as far as skill selection stuff goes, so nothing should be getting buffed that's relevant. I think we'll just take the badge off just in case, because I forgot to do that. Okay, cool. It's not really that important anyway. So, Nightblade Tree, this is where it gets really quite busy. We've got a lot of selections in here. Yeah, nothing has been plus skilled, so that's pretty good and awesome and nice. So, of course, we've gone into the dual-wielding tree. I've got 3 points in dual blades. I kind of snuck as many points in there as I could. This is mainly due to, and we haven't talked about gear yet, but basically there's pierce converted to acid damage, I think, mostly. I don't know if there's any pierce to poison. I think it's pierce to acid predominantly. So having some flat piercing damage doesn't go astray. Now that's not a lot, but it's not an insignificant amount either. I'd ideally put more, but we're spread a little bit thin as it is, so I'm okay with it at 3. It seems to be helping. helping. So now Belgothian's is at 4 flat, and Amarasta's Quick Cut is also at 4 flat. They both go up to 5. I'd like to try get them to 5 out of 8, because that's when their chance to be used caps at 20%. So that's why I've got that. I've got Nidalla's Hidden Hand Raw at 6 out of 8, but that goes over 8 out of 8 once we've got our gear on. That modifies Belgothian Shears and Amarasta's Quick Cut to basically give a whole bunch of acid and poison and other good stuff, which is why we want that to be as high as possible. I've got 1 point in Whirling Death as well, because I do like having an AoE triggering passively just as we're swinging our weapons around, so that's why I've got that. It's not super awesome in terms of damage, but it helps. And that's more personal flavor for me, because like I said, I enjoy having a passive AoE 360 degree attack. You can probably take that out if you're not super into it. So that is that. Next down the line, we've got Amarasta's Blade Burst. I've just got that at 1 point out of 16 passively to open Lethal Assault. Now Lethal Assault's really awesome because when it triggers, which is basically all the time, because I've actually got Amarasta's Blade Burst bound to left mouse button, which basically means it triggers as soon as it can, because we're always using left mouse button to attack, and then when it's on cooldown, we just default to our normal weapon attacks, which incorporates all the dual wielding stuff. So every time that trips, it gives us a bunch of acid damage, it gives us a bunch of flat... Sorry, I said the flat damage. It gives us a bunch of percentage damages that are relevant as well as a bunch of offensive ability, which is really, really awesome. This also offers a bunch of cold damage, and I've seen versions of similar builds where it does cold to acid damage conversion, which is really, really cool. It may even end up being more effective than how I'm doing this, because they basically stack the bejesus out of Lethal Assault, and then convert cold to acid damage as well. It's a really interesting approach. If I could find a link, I probably can. We'll see how we go. But anyway, that's just another version of, it's a build in a similar vein. But that's off topic. Very good skill right there. Just 1 point in Ring of Steel because of the stun. And I like to get the Ring of Frost modifier because it freezes for 3 seconds, which is just extra immobility against our enemies. And I've gone up to Circle of Slaughter, but I've only put 1 point in it. Now, again, we'll get to gear selection, but this ends up going to like, I think 5 or 6 or some crazy good number, and that chance to fumble attacks ends up being pretty dang handy. It messes with enemies quite a lot, and it hits in a decent AoE, so it actually ends up working out as another pretty handy sort of debuff slash crowd control, which you kind of really need for this build because it is on the squishier side. Now, Shadow Strike just at 1 point out of 16, mostly because I wanted to unlock Nidalla's justifiable ends. Now, I got really into this skill. It's really quite awesome. It's at 10 out of 12 raw. I think it maxes out to 12. I'll put all the gear on so we can have a look after this. But it does a lot of of just poison damage, just straight up 9.8k right now, and it goes to crazy numbers in the end, and the crit damage as well is really, really awesome. So it's a huge poison damage dot, and when you combine that with Vile Eruption, which I've got bound to Shadow Strike, it does really gnarly amounts of poison damage, so it's sick. Okay. Now, Pneumatic Burst at 10 out of 12. Again, I'm pretty sure that maxes out to 12 out of 12. Our other healing slash offensive spell that we want to keep going most of the time. We want to keep this going as well because of its defensive traits, defensive ability, and chance to avoid attacks from Shadow Dance. And I've got Elemental Awakening at 4 out of 12 right now. That was mostly to give us the elemental resistances, but I probably don't need them so much anymore, come to think of it, and I should have checked before this build because my elemental resistances are pretty good with gear now. So you can take or leave that as you need it for the sake of elemental resistances. Yeah, that's all there is to it, really. And then Breath of Belgothian, it's just a 1 out of 1 skill modifier. Why not? Since we're dual wielding, it just reduces the cooldown and increases the health regen. Very nice. Veil of Shadow at 3 out of 10. I think that goes a little further up down the track from memory. And then I've got Night's Chill at 9 out of 10, and I'm pretty sure that will go to 10 out of 10. Our passive debuff that just triggers when we get in a radius of enemies. I have toyed with the idea of instead using Curse of Frailty and Vulnerability because it technically does debuff a little tiny bit more Then Knight's Chill when it comes to poison and acid resistance, but because this is just a passive, I don't have to cast it, and there's a bit going on with, even though there's only a few skills, there's a bit of casting going on, so having that cognitive load sort of off my mind, just knowing it's passively debuffing, is nice. So 1 point out of 12 on Blade Barrier, just the panic button. If you're in a real pinch, just chuck that on and you should be safe. Oh, by the way, you could, if you preferred to, you probably could do a Curse of Frailty option instead of Veil of Shadow, Potato, depending on your playstyle and preference. Either should work fairly well. 1 point in Phantasmal Armor, 1 point in Anatomy of Murder, and 11 out of 12 in Merciless Repertoire. That's sort of the key out of these bottom three because of the flat poison damage that it gives you, or flat or raw poison damage I should say, as well as all those tasty damage percentage buffs. Anatomy of Murder is just nice to have, and again I think that's going to get buffed. Let's put all the gear on now, and we'll talk about gear properly. Can I just right click? I don't even remember anymore. No, you go in there. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. Bing, bang, bang, bong. That is everything. Yeah, we're fully geared now. We'll talk about this in a moment, don't worry. So let's have another look through. Now, Blood of Dree goes out to 14 out of 16. Aspect of the Guardian doesn't move. Ideally, I'd have these both maxed, but I had to redistribute some points to get it to where I wanted it, so it's a bit of a bummer. Yes, all these go up, as you can see. All these go up by 1 point, except for Nidalla's Hidden Hand, which is at 12 out of 8 now. Oh, yeah. Amoras's Blade Burst incidentally goes up to 9 out of 16. Lethal Assault goes to 14 out of 12. Ring of Steel goes crazy high, 9 out of 16. 4 out of 12 on Circle of Slaughter. Shadow Strike up to 4 out of 12. I probably don't need to talk you all through this. You can see the differences, but everything gets a nice little boost, and this is why as well, for example, 1 point in Phantasmal Armor ends up going up to 5. It ends up being pretty handy with that extra Pierce Resist, that extra armor it gives, so, at a cost of 1 point, why not? Same with Circle of Slaughter, 1 point, it ends up going out to 4 points, which gives us a 22% chance to fumble attacks for 5 seconds, which is pretty dang handy, so hence that reason. Whew. Quite a lot to say. Without further ado though, let's hop over. In fact, we'll first hop over to attributes really quick. Again, this is a predominantly physique invested build. So I've got 80 points in physique and 8 points in spirit and nothing in cunning because there wasn't really a need to. I had probably put those few points in spirit just to wear certain like rings and stuff at certain times. Maybe you could get away with not investing that at all and go straight physique. Being a dual wielder, again, see, the current meta seems, at least to me, be predominantly just going all physique to help with the squishiness. So, now here we are on the devotion panel. Hopefully I don't need to make any tweaks on the fly, as I've realized I've made mistakes, but we'll see how we go. I apparently have points in Chaos, in, come on brain, Primordial, I always forget, and Order. Yeah, and Order. I think those are all necessary from memory, hopefully they are, and I'm not making a fool of myself. The main goal with this devotion investment, honestly, I probably leaned slightly to the offensive side because I like to do that with devotions. Again, that's just my kind of fun way of doing things. Maybe slightly to the detriment of the build, but you could tweak this probably to your own flavor if you have better knowledge of this stuff than me. My main goal was to get over to the Abomination constellation because I really had to get Tainted Eruption. Now, in my defense, this has got quite a defensive aspect to it, with the confused target for 1.8 seconds, which is nothing to sneer at because its radius is 10 meters, so it confuses a lot of chumps and gets them all dispersed in an Adiabiznak, so it's pretty handy. So that was predominantly requiring Chaos and Eldritch. Yes, got it right again. So I wormed my way down to that. From the crossroad, after those initial investments, I've got the Rat, which is poison and stuff, and kind of moderately helpful, as well as Jackal, as well as is as well moderately helpful. Gives us attack speed and that kind of thing. 15% to all damage is actually not shabby. And the 3 Chaos affinity, of course. Now I've got Acheron Scorpion maxed out. Does poison stuff, but also, well, rather, I also have. I'm not even making sense. I'm so sorry. I've got Scorpion Sting bound to Ring of Steel, which is its active or triggered skill. from this constellation. It's pretty decent, gives us a decent amount of damage of the poison variety, passes through enemies with 6 projectiles, which is pretty good AoE, and reduces target's defensive ability by 140 for 5 seconds. So pretty nice debuff if I do say so myself. I've got Spider maxed out, predominantly because it gives us 6 of the Eldritch Deliciousness. It's got decent stuff on it too, particularly Chaos Resistance there. It's quite nice to see, and some other little bits and bobs which aren't too bad by any stretch. Now I've also got Manticore, which is kind of par for the course for poison, and even for some non-poison builds, because Acid Spray has 30 reduced targets resistances for 5 seconds, flat resistance reduction, which is pretty dang sweet. Also gives us good poison and acid damage, yada yada you. It's a very, very good skill. You should probably know about it. And I've got that bound to Amarasta's Blade Burst. It's got a fairly short cooldown, both Amarasta's Blade Burst and Acid Spray. So that triggers probably as often as it can. It's got a 27% chance to trigger off Amarasta's Blade Burst, which means it goes off fairly often. I've seen some arguments for putting that on like Belgothian Shears or one of the passive Nightblade skills. I don't like doing it that way, because those skills in of themselves only have a 20% chance to trigger at max. And I'll even show you, if I put this on Belgothian Shears, it has 15% chance on attack. So that's 15% chance of 20% chance, because those percentages sort of stack off each other, if that makes sense. So if you do the math, you end up with a fairly small chance per attack for it to trigger. If someone did proper math, you could probably make the argument and say that because of the cooldowns, it ends up about the same or better. But I've been doing it on Amarasta's Blade Burst, and it seems to be working out pretty decently. Giant's Blood, or Behemoth and Giant's Blood rather, is probably the main defensive choice I've made. Got all the nodes there because it does give us both Chaos and Primordial. Just a bunch of health buffs, essentially, and Giant's Blood is the passive heal, which triggers when we get hit. I've got it bound to Veil of Shadow, but you can bind it to any permanent passive that you have handy. Saves your life more often than not, I must say. As for the Abomination, I've only gone up the middle because that's compulsory, and then down his right arm, or its right arm. Bunch of good poison and acid stuff, and Tainted Eruption, as I spoke about, is really, really brutal. 27k poison damage over 5 seconds with a confuse of 1.8 seconds. Bound to Shadow Strike for the ultimate in poison, awesome nukage of epicness. You get the idea. I really, really like the skill. It's a lot of fun. If we sweep over, I've grabbed Empty Throne. It has nothing really to do with the poison progression. It's just got a bunch of nice resistances on it. Particularly, it gives you Chaos and Ether resistance, which are often quite hard to come by. So getting that's always a nice little thing. Final 2 constellations, I've grabbed Tortoise and I've grabbed Eel. These are both purely defensive investments, I must confess. As the build progressed into Ultimate, it was getting a little on the squishy side, so I grabbed both of those, and they are helping just a little bit with how we do things. So, I guess that's all I need to say for devotions. Let's hop across to, what's the next thing? Gear. We'll talk about the gear selections. Alright, so here we are looking at the gear stuff. Now, first cab off the rank. This is pretty close to being pretty good gear, predominantly because I have managed to finagle a complete Venom Blade set. I can't remember what it's called, the something of the Venom Blade. It's very, very good. The Venom Blade pack, there you go. It says it right there on the screen, everybody. Now, kudos and shout out to the Grim Dawn community, because they are freaking awesome people, and I managed to trade up to collect all the bits, actually. I couldn't get any drops. Actually, you can see, I don't always do level 85 build guides. I don't get all the way up to level 85 with some of them, so I've grinded, I've done stuff. I've looked for this gear for freaking hours and no such luck. So, big shout outs and props to the Grim Dawn community for making a community that feels safe and wholesome and allows for trading without sort of any third-party peripheral in-between cough blizzard trading system. So, that is, of course, an integral part of the build, in my opinion, and it was working fairly well, but not perfectly well without it. So, that aside, I will go through each piece and we will talk about them as best we can. So, Fist of the Venom Blade, funnily enough, is very, very good. You can see all the stats. I'm not going to read out every single stat. I don't think I need to at this point. It's a very good weapon. I have slotted in it a Shard of Benarath, I believe, but the tooltip glitches because it doesn't like... There we go, it's working from here now. So you can see how the Fist of the Venom Blade works out. Yeah, Shard of Benarath is on that. Mostly because of the... What's it called? The just straight percentage to all damage that it gives. You could probably put other things on there, but that's working out pretty good for me. I'm pretty happy keeping that in there. And it's expensive, and I don't want to get rid of it now either. Sorry. So, I can't remember the other thing I've got on there. The augment, because there's so many tooltips going on here that I can't honestly tell you. I would have selected defensive augments of some kind, probably buffing defensive ability or health or some such. I'm sorry, but I can't actually tell. I always... not insist, I always recommend that you just choose augments based on, like, they're good gap fillers for your characters, essentially. So, this is how I've done the augments, but you can plug the gaps in your specific character's needs. If you're certain short on resistances, or you're feeling a little short on health, or a little short on offensive or defensive ability, you get the idea. And that's exactly what I've done here. So, I've got an empowered Ring of Vile Intent. I could probably find better rings than this, but it gives a whole bunch of acid and poison damage, as you can imagine. Elemental resistance is actually really nice. 24% elemental resistance is dang good, I must say. So I'm pretty stoked on that. I've got a Corpse Dust on there, because again, I was feeling a little low on the health side. And I can't remember which augment I've got on there, but it gives, I think it's the Devil's Crossing one, or the Rover's one. It gives health, health regeneration, and elemental resistances. Cowl of the Venom Blade, of course, one of the other compulsory pieces, gives us a whole bunch of really good stuff. You can see there the cold damage converted to acid I was talking about earlier on as another potentially viable way to approach this build. Resistances across the board, plus skills, and of course is part of the Venom Blade Pact. I've got a Sanctified Bone in that because of the resistances mostly. The damage to Undead and Chthonics is probably more handy than I realize as well. So, and I've got 10% Ether Resistance via Augment on that. Lightbringer's Vyloth's Ring, pretty decent monster infrequent, again giving us acid damage, offensive ability, chaos resistance, and plus 2 to Amarasta's Blade Burst. All pretty nice things amongst others that aren't so useful there, but nevertheless. I've got a Mark of Illusions on there, which seems silly, but it gives me defensive ability, mostly is why I grabbed that. Again, feeling pretty low on that side of things, so kind of... at the cost of certain other stats, and slotting a Mark of Illusions there, but if I find better gear, I'll probably swap that out. Now, I know I've got this augment from Devil's Crossing, 20% to all damage and 2% to both offensive and defensive ability. That's actually a really, really, really nice augment. It's once you get revered with them. I might even put more of those on there. I'm not 100% sure, but then other things go by the wayside, so that's, you know, the to and fro of gear selection. Now I've got Avatar of Mercy as the amulet here. This is a very, very defensive piece of gear, but I found it necessary to make the build work when it comes to ultimate viability for this build. Very, very defensive, bunch of resistances, flat defensive ability, and grants the skill Mercy when activated, which is below 30% health. Does a bunch of health restoration, damage absorption, and a bunch of other resistance things. So, very, very, very much a lifesaver, and can trigger from time to time and stop you from dying. Yeah, that's a really big. If I take this off, defensive ability drops to under 1.8k, which is not very nice. So that's why I've gone with that. Again, if other bits of gear work out differently, I could probably swap that out. Whew. What's next? Oh wait, I didn't mention the things. I've got a Focusing Prism in there because of the extra crit damage that it gives. The minus skill energy cost is kind of nice too. And I've also got the Augment, again, giving us health and elemental resistances. I should write these down for next time. I'm sorry, I'm very bad at this. Razor of the Venom Blade. Who knew? The other weapon that makes up the dual-wielding craziness of this build. Similar to the Fist, giving us a whole bunch of relevant damage types. Attack speed on this one is very, very nice. Plus skills, etc., etc. On this, you can't see it, but I'm pretty sure I've got a Mark of Dreeg on here, which is the poison, acidy / reduced resistances component. And yeah, I can't see the augment because of the tooltip. I'm very, very sorry. Now, next one, don't laugh. Elite Devil Spaulders, I know, not the best. just again, in my gear travels, I'm yet to come across something that's doing a better job than this. It's not great, but I mean, it gives flat piercing damage, it gives OA and DA, it gives some resistances, and +2 to Shadow Strike, so it's also not the worst bit of gear you could ever come across. I've got a Silk Swatch in there, and I've got Lightning and Ether Resistance slotted in the Augment. Viper Fang, oh my gosh, Viper Fang Grips. This is totally such a homebrew / off-the-cuff guide, holy moly. Viper Fang Grips. Arguably best in slot for this build because it's just so poison focused. Again, you could possibly pick something more defensive minded, but can't help myself. Particularly 2% offensive ability plus flat offensive ability plus skills. It's actually got vitality resistance on there, which is pretty handy. It's nasty. It's pretty nasty, man. And it gives the Envenom granted skill, which is a bunch of poison damage and slowing when triggered on critical attack. I've got Consecrated Wrappings slotted on there because of the attack speed, mostly, and 10% ether resistance also slotted in there. Venom Spine Greaves, again, arguably best in slot for this build because of all the relevant damage types, once again, plus resistances, plus movement speed, plus the plus skills that it's got, plus the granted skill Venom Spines, which just shoots out in all directions, piercing through enemies, and doing lots of poison and acid and piercing damage, plus a little bit of main hand damage, which is nothing to sneer at. You could argue for something like Golemborn Greaves. They're like fairly standard meta, you know, in a lot of builds because they're pretty solid defensive boots. I can't remember the exact skill that's triggered off them, but it's very keeping you alive-y. So you could use those in place of these if you wanted to, but you know, I'm having fun doing it this way. I've got a Mark of Mog Drogon in there, and apparently no augment. That's weird. I'm gonna have to sort that out. But I would probably put more ether resistance, looking at my current resistances there, just which you can get from Anasteria, I believe, in 40con. Badge of Mastery for the badge because it's awesome. It gives offensive ability, percent to all damage. You can see the stuff there. It's pretty dang solid, and the resistances as well are very, very nice. The plus skills are fairly irrelevant for us, but it's still a very nice badge in lieu of finding anything better. I really like the Prowess skill as well, which on enemy death gives us a bunch more offensive and defensive ability and increases our health regen. It's really, really cool. And I've got Black Tallow on there, again predominantly for the chaos resistance that it offers. Whew. As we keep moving right along, Tinker's Ingenuity, I've talked about this in previous builds. Very, very good standard fare in terms of a defensive belt that you can put on your character. Really good resistances, constitution buff, and plus to maximum resistances, which is really, really cool, and you don't come across that all that often. The skill Tinker's Ingenuity as well, which triggers very, very good in a defensive sense. It will help you keep you alive. Also, I've got a Molten Skin in there because of the fire resistance, which I think I still need. Oh, I only lose 1%, so it's not the worst, so I could think about changing that out. But it gives armor as well, if I'm not mistaken, which I was slightly lacking in. And again, ether resistance slotted in there. We'll come back to the badge, the relic. Pants, pretty great pants. Now, I know it seems kind of weird. I haven't really seen these used that much, but they're pretty nice. Plus to health, plus to movement speed are really, really good. The chance to avoid melee attacks and chaos resistance. They are not, by any stretch, shabby. I don't have better pants than this for this build, straight up. I could not find anything better. At least in my inventory. There could be better pants that exist, but I don't have them. So I'm going with these for now. But this skill, Shimmering Splendor, 100% chance when hit, in an 8-meter radius has a chance to either terrify or confuse targets. Now, you get hit a fair amount with this character, so scaring off targets every 12 seconds when you get hit is really, really, really handy. It's super nice. It's good to have. Now, I've got a Silk Swatch in there too, and again, ether resistance on the augment. Rounding out the Venom Blade set, Stealth Jacket of the Venom Blade. Again, very in line with the other Venom Blade stuff that we've talked about. The resistances, this one's got health on it as well, which is really nice. Plus skills that are relevant to the build once again. I've got Chains of Oleron on here because of the offensive ability awesomeness that it gives. 12% to all damage is also, of course, very, very nice. Again, ether resistance slotted in there. And now the complete Venom Blade set gives you a whole bunch of really nice buffs and deliciousness. And the final complete set gives you Venom Wrath, which is a 33% chance on critical attack, to debuff opponents really, really heavily, as well as doing some nice acid damage. So it's a really cool completion bonus, I guess you could say. I really like it. I really like using it. And that debuff is pretty dang handy, I've got to say. Now, to round it all out, I'm using the Malediction Mythical Relic, which is very, very, very nice. Poison damage, acid damage, etc., etc. Again, really relevant stuff to that build. It also gives the Malediction passive, which is very, 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 very nice as well. Man, I cannot talk at all. There is another relic which you can craft out of a Malediction and other stuff. If only I could remember. Is it Dreeg's Affliction? We should probably go check. I'm sorry to teleport on camera. There is another one you can make, which you could, again, arguably use. But I like the fact that Malediction is a passive buff that's always on. Well, I always have it on anyway. Let's go have a quick look. Which one was I thinking of? Did I get it right? I was totally right. Dreeg's Affliction. So this gives also relevant stuff. It gives 4% total speed and +1 to all skills in Occultist, which are arguably things you really would want. But the granted skill is Dreeg's Afflicted Spines, which, look, does do really nice damage. It's a big old nuke. Geez, now I'm looking at it, I'm kind of tempted to get it. But it's an active skill, and it recharges every 8 seconds. But we've already got so many different damage nukes and stuff that I should try it and see if I like it. But I really like the idea of Malediction being a passive buff that's just always on and always helping, rather than having another button to press. So that's why I'm going with that, but geez, you could really argue for using that, couldn't you? I'll leave that up to you. You might even tell me off in the comments and tell me I should be using it, but that's how I'm doing it for now, and it's working out fairly okay. And I think that's it. I think we covered all the gear. It's pretty full on, man. But things work out pretty well. Resistance-wise, we're really dang solid. Offensive ability goes up to like 2.4 or 2.5k once everything is switched on. And defensive ability from memory does tickle 2k, which is not bad for a dual wielder. We rely a lot on triggers like Pretty Great Pants, and our defensive devotion constellations, and the skill from Avatar of Mercy. All these things combined, as well as even, what's it called? This dude over here. Big Abomination Man. Casting his Tainted Eruption. All these stuff combined is really what keeps the build going, more than just flat defensive ability and armor absorbing damage. So that is that. Geez, that was such a ramble. I hope it made sense. This is going to be a longer build guide than I'm used to making. But anyway, next phase we'll be talking about the progression of the build, as in leveling it up from 1 onwards, and we'll talk a little bit about playing the build itself. So, leveling progression for Nidalla's Witch Hunter. Always a thing I find a little funny to talk about, because, at least for the early game stuff, because early game is fairly inconsequential when it comes to that kind of thing. You shouldn't really struggle too much early game because it's not too difficult. That being said, I'll try my best to offer some advice in this regard. I would certainly recommend starting with the Nightblade tree first, because that's where most of your point investment is going to go in the long run. Even though you complete the Occultist mastery in terms of its mastery bar, a lot more total points go into Nightblade, and a lot more useful stuff, I suppose, if we can say that, even though Occultist is still important. A lot of points go into Nightblade, so jump in there. You could probably, I would say, go to the you'd probably want to get to Shadow Strike at like a bare minimum for your first go around in leveling up Nightblade. You'd want to grab Armoraster's Blade Burst on the way. Dual wielding early game is probably optional. You can if you'd like to and you think it's fun, but dual wielding super early on can prove to be a little problematic because it's obviously so offensive in nature. It can cause a little bit of a problem for you, but play around with it. If you like it, you can certainly go with it. You can also drop a point or two in Veil of Shadow as you go, because you'll be using that later on. So yeah, at least going to Shadow Strike I think is a first go around. You could keep pushing on if you're feeling okay with the build. Of course you want to grab some points in Pneumatic Burst, Breath of Olgothian, and Shadow Dance all you're going along. And then you want to hit up Ring of Steel after that, of course. And since it's on the same line and it's only 1 point, grabbing Blade Barrier. Grab it when you feel like you need it. If you feel like you're getting close to dying more than you would like, put a point in it, bind it up to a key, and be clicking it when you're dying. But I found that probably anything earlier than late Elite, I wasn't really feeling a need for it. So to each their own, see how you go. And then from there, you probably want to jump to Occultist and at least climb up to Blood of Dreig, being the skill you'll be using. From Occultist, of course. You could even, if you wanted to, since you'd only be going to the Circle of Slaughter line, you could, in Nightblade, you could go all that way up there and then be putting 2 points in the Occultist Mastery Bar and 1 point in a Nightblade skill, as per the Grim calculations down below, or the earlier part of the video where we talked about that. And then you sort of just go from there. So you can pretty much sit on just having a few points in Blood of Dreig for quite a while until Nightblade's fairly fleshed out in terms of the build guide itself, and then just jump back in from there and be cranking points into Occultist, because you have to get all the way to the very end to get to Possession, because that's a very, very nice skill. But it's not like super duper important and imperative until you've got decent points dotted through the healing spells, Nightblade, and from both trees. Basically, having some decent points in Nidalla is justifiable ends. And then once you're getting towards, you know, probably late, mid to late normal, you can start thinking about cranking more points into the dual-wielding tree, because you shouldn't be in too rough of a shape when it comes to being able to deal with enemies, and have some hopefully decent weapons by then, so you can justify dual wielding them. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, I'm a little bit fuzzy when it comes to the whole progression sort of thing, because I'm very much like a by feel kind of player when it comes to choosing skills on the fly. Like, I feel like I need some of this now, and then I feel like I need some of this. I don't really follow a regimented pattern when it comes to choosing the skills. So just bearing that in mind. But yeah, totally, the focus is most definitely early game, getting into Pneumatic Burst and Shadow Strike and Amarasta's Blade Burst. And then when you feel like you can jump into Occultist to at least start getting some points into Blood of Dreig, because if you're starting to struggle a little bit, having both those healing spells going along in synchronicity is very, very delightful, and plays very much into the playstyle of this build, which we will talk about now. So in terms of playing this build on the whole, once you've got all your skills sorted out and that sort of thing, if I can use the phrase, it's very much a run and gun kind of approach, even though we're using melee weapons. And what I mean by that is you've got Shadow Strike. So Shadow Strike you're using to duck in and out a lot during the battle. You zip in, you knock out a few enemies, and you run away if you can. The build is not super defensive in nature, so you won't take a complete clobbering, but if you get yourself in the wrong position and you stay in the fray for too long, you might find yourself getting a bit too smushed, and of course nobody wants that. So hopefully the footage that you see around me is demonstrating how I'm zipping in, having Devotion's trigger, and using Brain, come on, Ring of Steel to spread some stun and that sort of thing, and just try to be nimble through the battlefield. So that enemies can't really get too much of a lock on you. But pretty great pants, if you manage to get a set of those, are really handy at dispersing enemies when they hit you, because they get all confused and rattled and walk around like idiots, so that's very, very nice. Now the two healing spells, of course, that we've got, Pneumatic Burst and Blood of Dreig, work in very good tandem, and I like to think of them, and I would highly recommend thinking of them more like passives that you have to cast a whole bunch. Obviously, if you need heals, cast whichever one is off cooldown and heal yourself. You don't want to die. That is very imperative when it comes to using these skills, not to forget that they are for healing, but they both offer so many other passive buffs, offensive ability, defensive ability, amongst both skills, OA, DA, relevant damage types, total speed, obviously healing, health regeneration, chance to avoid attacks. I don't know if I mentioned that. There's heaps of stuff that you want to have all the time if you can, so make sure you got those both switched on pretty much all the time, or at least when you're active in battle. Have them going, and you should have a pretty dang good time. And yeah, then from there it's just a case of using your left click to get that old Amarasta's Blade Burst triggering as often as you can, zip around with Shadow Strike, throw a Blade Barrier if you're feeling in a little bit of trouble, and hopefully you'll be having a good time. So that's it from me, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this build guide. I hope I was delivering it to some level of coherency. As always, if you have any questions, suggestions, concerns, comments, thoughts, brainstorms, leave them in the comments section down below. That would be delightful. If you just enjoyed it and you wanted to show some support, press that thumbs up, give it a like. If you want to see more build guides, more Grim Dawn content, and more deliciousness from the world the world of RPGs in general, click subscribe and make sure to hang about, because I'm a fun guy and you are a fun person, so let's talk and do stuff. Anyway, I'm gonna go. This is a shocking sign up. My name is Kluger. You have a great day.